Tessa Eastman is an award-winning sculptor, so I wanted to pick her brain and ask her what Tessa was feeling when she won her first award.
I never really thought I was going to win it, and
what does it take to become an award-winning sculptor?
sometimes if you don't always get accepted, you can actually...
When was the moment that Tessa knew she was going to be heading in the right direction with her sculptures?
The work was very different, and I had quite a big break between...
But before those questions, I wanted to ask her this. What is something that has helped you the most along your pottery and sculpture journey so far?
Teaching is really helpful for me because I get to share what I do so subconsciously and communicate that to others. So usually I'm just making things in the studio on my own. It's quiet. And then when I'm with others, I get to share what I do in the studio. And it's, it's also what I do is quite isolating being in the studio. So teaching allows me to meet really interesting, lovely people from all different backgrounds and walks of life, and get to share with them how to make things, and seeing the pleasure of them making and creating things that they feel proud of is really life affirming for me and uplifting, and I can see it benefit them as well. So yeah, I think definitely teaching is something I really enjoy and really stimulates my own work.
How does it stimulate your own work?
How does it stimulate my own work? Just like students often ask me about my work and what I'm doing, and I get to share that with them, and even just seeing things that they're doing. And, sometimes we work on a specific project and it could be something that, I don't know about. So I learn from them, or something that I do know about and they're really interested in, and they start sort of reinterpreting, the theme and that I'm interested in their own way. And I find that really, exciting to see how they interpret something. Yeah, I'm sort of thinking about the natural world. So nature, and kind of looking at nature under the microscope is really inspiring for me in my work. And, sometimes we do projects around that. And when I see what the students create, that to me is really exciting. I get to see how they interpret a theme that I explore a lot in their own way. And then equally, if they choose something that I don't know much about. For example, I was teaching a student from Greece recently, and it was Easter, and they were talking about all these kind of eggs and how they dye the eggs for Easter, and they're all these red eggs, and then they make all these ceramic trays that the eggs sit on. So she was making these trays for eggs. And I just found that really interesting, hearing about her culture and her history and how ceramics is so ingrained in her culture. And I can see how much pleasure she was getting from making these egg trays. And she even brought in an egg box and tried to press the clay into the egg box, and then realized she wanted to make it by hand and not use the egg box. So it was just really exciting seeing that.
Absolutely love it. Tell me the story how you got started making sculptures.
I very quickly moved into sculpture from functional pottery. I was very lucky to have pottery in my school. A lot of schools in the UK don't always have a pottery studio, and there are people today trying to kind of make sure that more schools, I think, have pottery studios, because I think it's so important for people's well-being. And even sort of people who are not very creative, maybe more academic students, I think doing pottery can be really helpful for anyone, not just creative people. I was lucky to have a studio at school, and I was not academic and struggled quite a lot at school. I just found the pottery studio a place of sanctuary for me, really, and I just loved being there. And I was blessed with a really good teacher who let me go in there when I wanted to, out of school hours sometimes, and make in there. There was a really nice group as well of us who were there. So I think the group, I've always been lucky with having really nice groups that I've worked with or studied with. I think people who do ceramics are generally really nice, I find. So yeah, it developed early on at school, but I do come from quite a creative family and was kind of making things with my hands for really young, age 6. I sort of was making and drawing, always being creative. But yeah, I sort of, much prefer to make things. That's kind of my favorite thing to be doing, really, is to use my hands. And that started from my mum at home and then into my school years.
So you mentioned that you were first a potter and then you transitioned into sculpture. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so that happened at school. My mum wanted me to study art and learn how to draw. And I had a really good friend at that time who, her mum was American, I think. And I think her mum had been to a lot of the open access pottery studios that there are around the US. They've only just started happening in the UK. So her mum had a big introduction into ceramics. And so my friend was going to do pottery, and I wanted to join my friend and do pottery. And It just sounded exciting and interesting. And so, yeah, my mum was like, no, you should go and learn to draw. But I went and did pottery and loved it. And we had all these projects. And very early on, I sort of moved away from functional things into more natural forms, really. I made this Nick thing that was based on a spaceship because we had a project about press molding. So I press molded 2 kind of plates and put them together. And then it was also about mechanics. So we had to find mechanical things and add that in. So I started making kind of clay screws and nuts and bolts and adding them and making this. So I think I just felt, yeah, and I do feel suffocated a bit by the wheel and things always being in the round. And I get really excited when I can adjust the form and the shape and move away from the functional parts. Although I do very much see myself as belonging more to ceramic function, really, than to this kind of sculptural, the world of fine art and sculpture. And I teach in a place that works with sculpture. And I also teach in pottery studios. And I really like that juxtaposition. But from working in those 2 studios, I sort of really sometimes feel a bit more akin to the potters. I think just because of the level of discipline and organization and sort of systems required within pottery for drying, for looking after the pieces, for firing, for glazing, and sculpture can be a bit more messy and chaotic. So yeah, I think the kind of systems of pottery and the way that you work as a sculptor in clay, those systems are very similar. And my work is actually based on clouds, and clouds contain water. And so I feel like in a way the clouds is very much a link back to pottery history and pottery, where pots are a vessel for containing water for humans to have life. And of course, humans have water in our bodies. So I feel like the fact that I'm making clouds is very important to symbolize, the vessel and the human body, because clouds, the body and the vessel all contain water. So yeah.
Absolutely love it. So you have won a lot of awards for your sculpture. Can you tell me a story about when you won your first award for one of your sculptures?
Yeah, so one of the first awards, probably the most important in some ways because it granted me a solo show, it was called Craft Emergency, which sounds a bit desperate, doesn't it? But I think the award only ran for like a few years and then it stopped. So I don't think it exists anymore. And it was in the UK in a lovely gallery that was I think it was an old boathouse right by a harbour in Portsmouth Harbour, which is near the Isle of Wight in the UK. But yeah, I went to the show and it was a craft or mixed media craft award. So it wasn't just ceramics, and I never really thought I was going to win it. And yeah, I did. And I was a bit in shock. And there was actually a ceramic artist I knew, Sue Paraskiva, and she was shortlisted, and she came up to me afterwards and said, oh, really well deserved. And yeah, I just received a lot of kindness from her and from others. And the award was, yeah, really significant because it granted me a solo show within the space a year later. And it also came with some funding as well to work towards that. So that was the kind of first time that I received a solo show like that and some funding to go with it. And it allowed me to create some, a new body of work. And it was really, I never thought I would win it. So yeah, it was really helpful for my career.
What were you feeling when you won this award?
Wow, what was I feeling? To be honest, I just remember going down on the train. It was in the evening and I probably had to cancel a class or get someone to cover my class so that I could go down. And yeah, I was just sort of looking at all the work and thinking, how amazing. And the variety was really amazing. It was all very contemporary work. Yeah, there's a lot of like conceptual, there was, some sort of a lot of ideas behind the work, conceptual thinking behind the work. All different metal textiles. There was even like these kind of sculptural paper mache pieces, which were really interesting. But yeah, I was just sort of excited to see, the other work and didn't really know what to expect. So yeah, I mean, it was much younger then. I feel like I've matured a lot more in my career since then. But yeah, I guess I was really lucky to win an award because I know now it's competitive to win an award and it's challenging. And yeah, and there's a lot involved in who wins and why. And yeah, and the maker, the artist doesn't often know, the criteria or the reasons why, there's often an agenda with an award. So yeah, I feel very privileged and honoured to have won that and to have had the solo show and the prize money that came with that. And I also got to teach a workshop as a result of that to a group of people based around my work. So that was really, yeah. And I got paid to do that, which, you don't often get those opportunities. So that was really, really positive. Lots of positive things came out of that award that I wasn't expecting.
Absolutely love it. So now, if someone wanted to become an award-winning artist themselves, what should they do to make that become a reality?
Wow, what should they do? They should just apply for loads of things. Yeah, there's a good newsletter called Ceramics Now, and you can join the newsletter and they'll share like international prizes and things that are going on around the world. And I would say just like keep in touch with, what's going on in your field and things that are relevant to your work, and just keep applying for things. It does take a lot of time applying for things. So yeah, sort of maybe like save your applications and keep them all together, because sometimes you can kind of look back at one and then sort of try and use it for the other. Or sometimes if you don't always get accepted, you can actually look back at that application and go, oh yeah, that, I could have, done, this was now a bit stronger and I can reapply or apply for something else. But yeah, I would say that the key is just keeping applying for things and keep a good record of what you apply for and good systems in place to keep all the applications that you apply for and all the paperwork that goes with that together.
Absolutely love that. Shaping Nation, if you're looking to become an award-winning artist, the more you apply to things, the better chances that's going to happen. So let's talk about your sculptures. Tell me a story, how you started making the type of sculptures that you make today. Some exciting news happening on May 31st. I'm doing a workshop with guest artist Mike Sir, and he's going to be teaching how to make a goblet cup that looks like this. If you want to register for this workshop, click the link below. There are only limited spots available, so you better act fast. Now let's get back to the interview.
So yeah, it's been quite a long journey and my work has changed quite a lot, but nature has always been fundamental. The natural world, looking at the natural world as a kind of starting point, really. So yeah, as I said, I very early on, when I was kind of in my young teenage years, moved from function into sculptural work. And that was very, inspired by nature and people. I used to look in all these books at school and they're all like, a lot of kind of Bernard Leach brown kind of pots. Not that, I love pots. I love pots and I do like brown glazes, but it's not what I want to use or do with my work. And I just sort of used to get a bit disheartened. But, when you look in fine art books, there's like loads of paintings with colour and abstraction. And why, when I was looking in these books, I couldn't see much of, a kind of colourful work and things. I think today it's very different, but in those days there just weren't many books published about people working with colour and sculpture in clay. And there was Kate Malone, who was a big influence, who I actually went to work with for a big period in my early years. And there's also Richard Slee, which I don't think many people outside of the UK might not have heard of him. Kate Malone was on the Pottery Throwdown, so people might have heard of Kate, but Richard Slee, yeah, his work is kind of very colourful and kind of, bizarre and kind of sculptural and kind of references a lot of kind of Britishness. So, I don't know if he's shown a lot outside the UK, but he is a very prominent maker. And so these two artists got me really excited because they were making kind of unusual, non-functional, maybe suggestive of function, but not always totally functional works that were kind of brightly coloured. And so I got really excited by that. And that helped me to move into a kind of more sculptural, colourful, glazed vein. Getting the glazing right, for me, took longer than getting the making right, and takes a lot of practice and testing and understanding a bit about glazes. So I feel like I was always getting very frustrated that, I was happy with the form, but the pieces would come out the kiln and then the glazes would be awful and not go with the form or suit the form or be right. So I did start using commercial brush-on glazes. And then when I went to do a master's, my tutors were like, you cannot keep using commercial brush-on glazes, you have to stop. So I started to make my own during my master's, but nature has always been fundamental to my work. And I used to use kind of casts of children's toys and things like that. I think my work was it's still quite childish in some ways and playful, but it was a bit more childish in my early years, but understandably. And now, I'd say my work is more sophisticated, having been practicing for longer and working with clay and glaze for longer. But what was your question, Nick? It was
how you started making the sculptures that you make today.
So it's been a long journey. I've been lucky enough to study and do an undergrad and a postgrad. And that has really significantly helped me develop today. And having great teachers who have always been really inspiring. I think that's really important.
Why do you enjoy making sculptures instead of doing something else?
I tried doing other things. I mean, I tried. I did go and try and become a full-time teacher. But yeah, I just felt that was after I'd done my undergrad, and I felt like I hadn't worked really hard in my undergrad only to go and do a teaching qualification. I really wanted to give my work a go and to give it my all, really, and just to see where it would take me. So I did try doing other things. I also worked in a sculpture shop for a while, and, they would have all these phone calls about resins and certain plastics and what hardeners do you need and what fixers do you need and what's the P464, whatever. And I was like, I just know about plaster, clay and glaze, and I can tell you a lot about those things. But when you're starting talking to me about certain sculpture materials, I mean, I've always worked with clay and glaze, and I think I'm lucky to have done that because I feel there's so much to learn in that area, and the more you know, the less you know it. And yeah, I feel like, because I have a painter who's a very talented painter friend, and he's always like, why are you just always working with clay? Like, why don't you try something else? But the clay is just, it never ceases to tire me. I never get bored of working with it. I think there's always a new challenge around the corner and something new to learn and to discover. So yeah.
Absolutely love it. So something I found interesting is you are committed to the challenge of hand building in clay. The often overlooked the details of microorganic structures are observed to have developed sculptures of curious ambiguity. Tell me more about this.
Yeah. So yeah, as I said, committed to the hand building. So yeah, hand building is super important to me. During my postgrad, they wanted to break you down and build you up again. So they wouldn't allow me to do any hand building, and I had to try other techniques like slip casting and throwing on the wheel and mold making and things. And I did it, but I also wasn't allowed to use any color, which I found really hard because color is just so life affirming and intrinsic to what I do and how I live. And yeah, so that was a challenge. So hand building I feel like hand building is a challenge, and I enjoy that challenge, and I'm always spurred on by how to create something and how to make the work feel alive. The piece has to feel really alive and like it's a kind of living organism, even though it's like a static sculpture. That challenge spurs me on to get the clay to feel alive, because the clay, it comes from the ground. It can feel very alive, but as soon as you fire it, things can look dead. So the challenge is getting the piece to really sing and breathe and have a life of its own after the firing process. Yeah. I can't remember the question. So okay, got it. Sorry, Nick. Yeah, got it. So hand building is always a challenge, and that challenge spurs me on and kind of leads to the next piece. So I'm really committed to hand building as my primary way of working. And what was the other thing? Ambiguity. So I want the pieces to look strange and bizarre and uncanny and kind of otherworldly, to have resemblance to life, but be out of this life, like a fiction movie or something, like these cartoon characters from another planet. But I want to somehow escape the mundane of life to go into another world through these pieces. And of course, the color and the glaze helps that. But yeah, so that's the kind of curiosity. I want the pieces to be curious for people to bring their own interpretations to them. I like it when there's a kind of ambiguity work and that people can bring their own thoughts and ideas to something, even though it might not be what the artist has originally intended. I mean, there can be work that's very much wants you to think and is telling you, like maybe political work, for example, it wants to, to tell you a political way of thinking or being. But I feel like I want there to be an openness for people to reinterpret something their own way and to bring their own feelings, emotions, thoughts, ideas to the work, because I feel the work becomes richer and better for it.
So you mentioned that you want your static pieces to feel like they have life to them. How do you achieve this?
How do I achieve that? I guess through hand building. I think with hand building, you can build and construct things, and, you can suddenly be building straight up, and then you can go, oh, I want the piece to start coming out to the side. So you can start coiling it or slabbing it outwards. So I think the hand building allows me to achieve life within the work through the kind of flexibility I have whilst making. So I will start by drawing a sketch or making a kind of small maquette or a kind of test piece before I'll go into like the final work. But what I really like about clay is its malleability, and it's kind of it being very process led as a material. You're led by the process over the kind of original idea. So when you're making and building, things can change. So I love the fact that there's never a kind of fixed outcome whilst you're creating, and the clay kind of speaks to you and tells you what it needs and says, right, I need to go, down now. I need you to take me back down to the ground, or I need you to take me up. Or so I feel like the clay, really speaks to you while you're working it and tells you, dictates how it needs to be sometimes. And if you really listen to it, it does, it tells you things. So I think that's how I try and achieve the aliveness in the work, by listening to the material and responding to it as I'm creating an original idea that does often change.
Absolutely love that. Shaping Nation, you have to listen to the material, because the material is going to tell you the direction it wants to go. That way you can make the best piece you can possibly make. So now, what advice would you give to someone that is to make the best possible sculpture that they can make?
Oh, how do they make the best possible? Oh, well, I think if we could achieve our best, I think we just stop straight away. I think it's the fact that you can always do better or achieve better or try something different or adjust something, or, that you think is going to be for the best, that allows you to keep going. But I think you're only ever as best as your last piece, which I think is why one needs to make their practice really dedicated. I think, ceramics requires a lot of dedication and times, but it put into making and designing and creating and testing and firing. And I think to make your best work, you need to make your practice a dedicated one and dedicate yourself time to work with the material, because it's only through constant practice that you get better. Yeah.
Absolutely agree. Shaping Nation, keep practicing, keep making tiny improvements, and that's how you make the best pottery and the best sculptures that you can make. I love that. So let's talk about discovering your voice. Can you tell me about the moment when you knew you're heading in the right direction with your sculptures?
Oh, moment when I knew I was heading in the right direction. Yeah. So, the current work I make today kind of grew out of my postgraduate degree, really. When I was on my undergraduate, the work was very different. And I had quite a big break between my undergrad and my postgrad. And I really found that was helpful, because it gave me a chance to kind of start teaching, start being in the real world, start setting up a studio, establishing a dedicated practice. So that time between the undergrad and the postgrad was really valuable for me. I did apply for the postgrad straight after my undergrad and I didn't get in. And in hindsight, I feel really grateful, because it just gave me more time to just get established in the real world and not always be stuck in education. So I did apply for the postgrad again, because my work, I was working in a particular vein with casts of toys and commercial glazes, and I just felt that I'd kind of done all I had to do with this type of work and said all I needed to say, and I just felt really like I needed a change, and I wanted to develop and grow and explore new avenues, which was why I reapplied. And it was during my undergrad that I kind of got broken down and built up again, and all my current ways of working had to change. But I did eventually sort of go back to the things that I loved, the hand building, working occasionally with press molds. I loved glaze, and I learned to develop that in a more advanced way, and colour and surface, and really working with the form and the surface. I always think a good piece is, you can always tell a good piece by its form and its surface, and whether those are working together well. I'm not saying they always have to be in harmony with each other. There can be a kind of slight discord sometimes, but the glaze and the form have to feel like a unit, and like they're working, like they're suiting each other. There's a kind of relationship with that. So so it was during my postgrad that I was not allowed to hand build. I was not allowed to use colour, and those restrictions, they were good for me at the time, but they were a challenge. And then we had a project we were allowed to just do what we wanted to in a bit more of a free way. And I went back to the hand building and working with coloured glaze, and I just felt so happy again. I felt so like I was back to what my reason for living had been given back to me, and I was allowed to do what I love doing. And so I made this kind of organic kind of cloud-like shape. It was a kind of like voluminous, undulating, abstract, amorphous, kind of circular, but kind of going off in tangents shape. And yeah, that got me really excited. And that's when I sort of knew that, yeah, that hand building and sculpture and color and surface were my things, really. So yeah, so I think one has to keep working, shake things up a bit, try different things, but you just know when you love something and when it feels right and when it's kind of what you want to be doing and working on. You just know, your whole body starts singing, and yeah, you just start to feel good in yourself. So yeah, that's when I think I knew this is what I'm about. This is what my work's about. I'm a hand builder. I'm interested in form and surface, and there's so much to explore within that area that I felt I could never get bored by it.
Absolutely love that. Shaping Nation, if you decide to try a different technique and maybe you don't like it, you could always go back to the technique that you do like. Nothing is set in stone. I love that. What would you say are some of the new opportunities that started coming your way once you found your own voice?
Blended opportunities. Oh yeah. So yeah, I mean, they've always sort of come my way in kind of spurts. Sometimes you have a quiet period where there isn't much going on, and then that gives you the time to explore and experiment with your work and not have to make for an exhibition, for pieces to be seen. Sometimes it's nice just to make, knowing that the pieces aren't necessarily going to be shown and that they're just experiments and tests. And then other times it's nice to make work that is for an audience, where it's going to be a kind of cohesive body of work. It's going to be like a unit. They're going to be shown together. There's got to be a kind of relationship between the pieces for them to work as a grouping. The glazes need to work together. So yeah, I think things started to really evolve after my postgraduate, but I've always had little things like, for example, there's a gallery called CAA, Contemporary Applied Arts, and they're a membership gallery, but they do often put on shows that are very much about craft in the UK, and I got accepted to show them with some of my older work, which was about Harrow ceramics, where I studied, which was quite a significant course in the UK and had a big pottery tradition. It doesn't exist anymore, but I got offered to show at that show after the course had closed down. And yeah, that was, I showed my kind of earlier work there in a grouping, and a guy from Texas bought a few pieces. And, those were kind of my early days of just having a few. But there's always been like, you always think, oh, there's not going to be another opportunity for ages. And things do happen. And if they don't, you group together with your friends and you say, right, we're going to put on this exhibition together and we're all going to make a body of work around this. And, you can even get funding, put on shows together. I have lots of friends who group together and, they thought that maybe their work is of a similar style and they put on shows together. So I think you can also create your own opportunities, and I definitely think you have to create your own opportunities. I don't think you can just sit back and expect things to come your way. I think you do have to keep working, keep making, keep applying for things, keep speaking with your friends about your work and visiting shows that are interesting. I think just keep busy and things come through that. But yeah, I'm trying to think of something that was really important early on. I mean, there's just been lots of little things like, getting your work featured in a magazine. Yeah, there's a big magazine in the UK, and I had a big feature in that magazine as a result of a show in the US. So I feel like, that was to get a big feature like that was really good, because often you'll only get a little picture in a page of something, and for someone to write in depth about your work, that's a real honor and a privilege, and that came as a result of a show. So just these little things, I feel like if you just keep going, little things happen, and you have to be proactive yourself and initiate things as well. But yeah.
Absolutely love and definitely agree. So now, what advice would you give to someone looking to discover their own unique voice with their pottery or sculptures?
What advice I would give? Again, just make your work a real dedicated practice. Go and see shows, go and visit shows that interest you, and look at things in detail, like really learn, go and look at stuff. And it doesn't always have to be actually ceramics. Go and look at like a an exhibition by an artist in another material, that can be really inspiring. But yeah, definitely just get yourself out there and visit things and, listen to podcasts like you're doing, Nick. And I love listening to podcasts when I'm working.
Some excellent advice right there. Tessa, it's been great today. And as we come to a close here, what is one thing you want to hammer home with my listeners today?
One thing to hammer home: workshops, like live workshops by makers you admire. Like, I think there are so many demos and stuff, like NCECA has loads of demos by master makers. So I think just attending workshops by makers and seeing the way they create and they produce things and asking questions. I think there's great, because there's a lot of people now looking at things on YouTube, which is really amazing. But I think there's something about attending a workshop live and being with a maker and in their presence and seeing and hearing how they speak and what they do. I think there's something about being in the presence of another maker and watching their techniques, and even having a chance to take part in the workshop and have them watch over you at your technique. I definitely think that's a really valuable thing. So to attend workshops by makers that you admire.